Up ahead, we're going to meet our first sorcerer NPC, Carillion of the Fold. Unfortunately, he won't talk to me at the moment because I don't have a high enough intelligence stat to use sorceries. So I may have to come back here and talk to him again once I level up intelligence 1 or 2 more times. He is an interesting character though, and in a while we'll meet his apprentice who specializes in pyromancies.
I see light, but it remains dim. I am Carillion, and I've no interest in the magic impaired.
The Flexile Sentry boss reminds me of Pinwheel from the first Dark Souls, in that the fight itself isn't actually that hard, but man oh man is the music really creepy. The Flexile Sentry does have some pretty interesting lore though. The soul of the Flexile Sentry reads, "The Flexile Sentry is a merciless creature, whose purpose is to punish the undead." And as we gathered from No Man's Wharf, the sole purpose of this place was just to ship them off to the Lost Bastille, where all the undead were locked away. And it was the job of the Flexile Sentry to make that trip utterly miserable. There are 3 potential boss weapons you can get from his soul. Each of them has a little tidbit, but my favorite one comes from the Barbed Club, which reads, "A club forged from the soul of the Flexile Sentry. The spikes covering its length are as vile as the Sentry itself. The Sentry crammed inmates of the overflowing Bastille onto a rickety ship and cast them out onto the open sea. The majority of them drowned or starved, but a few hardy survivors made land to the south, and imparted their knowledge of sorcery to the people there." So we discover here that eventually the Bastille ran out of room, and the Flexile Sentry just took it upon himself to dump out these poor undead souls into the open ocean. What I find really curious, though, is this is the second time that it's made mention of these sorcerers, because in the description for some of the Varengarians from the last chapter, we found out that the sorcerers were also shipped out as well. So it's interesting how there's this side story of these sorcerers who were shipped out to the Lost Bastille, but ultimately made it back to land and imparted their knowledge to some other part of the kingdom. It's never said where these sorcerers ended up, but it is an interesting side story that's mentioned in this lore here. So I rather like the character and boss fight of the Flexile Sentry. I think he's an interesting piece of the puzzle revolving around the Lost Bastille, and we'll explore that area more thoroughly very shortly.
Bearer of the curse, seek lest.
I knew you'd be around soon. I'll be around if you make it back.
The Lost Bastille. For those of you who aren't aware, Bastille is a French word for prison, and the Lost Bastille is very much a prison, particularly for the undead. We haven't heard it ourselves in this playthrough yet, but Sweet Chalcoir does share some of her thoughts on the Lost Bastille, so I'm going to be reading from her dialogue. Once, people tried to round up the undead and hide them away from the world. They thought that imprisoning the undead would solve the problem. They created a towering Bastille to contain them, but in the end, it did no good. And the reason it did no good is because the curse of the undead is inescapable. Even if you manage to link the fire, at some point, the curse will return. And this is the result of Lord Gwyn's folly from the original Dark Souls. The Lost Bastille kind of serves a similar function to the Undead Asylum from the original game, in that all these undead are locked away to await the end of the world, and hopefully never interfere with any of the higher beings in the land. And as I stated earlier, it's my theory that the old Iron King helped build the Lost Bastille, and he's someone who absolutely hated the undead and the curse it brought. So despite all the king's attempts to stop the flow of this curse and just hide away from it, it eventually won out, and the old Iron King met a very gruesome fate. As for the area itself, I rather like the Lost Bastille and its design. I don't know if it's my favorite prison in the entire series. I think the Irithyll dungeon in Dark Souls 3 edges it out just a bit for me. That place is really creepy, and it reminds me of the Tower of Latria from Demon Souls. But the Lost Bastille is still pretty creepy in of itself, and it does have some really interesting architecture. So let's journey on and try to explore this vast undead prison.
I thought that might be you. You haven't changed a bit, have you? The longer I am here, the more madness I discover. A wretched place indeed, but not without traces of its former glory. What could have caused such degradation? Ah, yes. I have not thanked you for humoring me the other day. This is for you. Of course, I have no idea what it is. Our land of Mirror is surrounded by enemies and constantly at war. There is only one way up in Mirror. Join the Order and prove yourself in battle. My family had little fortune and no name. I had to carve out a piece of the world for myself. With two things: my sword and my loyalty to my lord. I was raised to wield a sword from birth. Life was hard, but I never gave it a second thought. I had swift success on the battlefield and quickly attained respectable stature. And then I came here to... Have you heard of the undead? These poor souls affected by the curse. An undead gradually loses his humanity until his wits degrade completely. Finally, he turns hollow and preys upon others. And a hollow can never be human again. One can skirt this wicked fate only with the help of the souls found here. Assuming, of course, that the legends are true. I can only hope that they are. I'm sorry to burden you with talk of my fate. I suppose I've grown weary these days.
So we now see that Lucatiel of Mira is marked by the curse of the undead, and she has come to the land of Drang Lake to save her humanity. Her giving us the human effigy is actually really important because she says she doesn't even know what it is. So she's definitely less knowledgeable about the nature of the curse and how to help stave it off. Lucatiel is a woman of strong ambition. She fought her way up to the top in the land of Mira, and now she's fighting for her very existence, for her soul, in the land of Drang Lake. And there are two endings for her story, but if we help her throughout her quest, we'll get the better of the two endings. So let's definitely shoot for that. Lucatiel's going to become one of our best companions on this quest, so we'll do our best to stick with her to the end. Ah, the Ruin Sentinels. The first time I played Dark Souls 2, this was the first boss fight I actually had a bit of trouble with, and the first one I had to summon outside help to help me get through the boss. I did even the odds a bit by summoning 2 other NPCs, but it is entirely possible to defeat this boss by yourself. You just have to kind of pace it a bit better than I did with my 2 other characters there, as well as try to keep track of where each of the Ruin Sentinels are. There's actually not too much lore to go on for the Ruin Sentinels. They're pretty basic monsters, story-wise, but I still love their design, and it's a pretty darn cool boss fight. The soul for the Ruin Sentinels reads, Soul of the Ruin Sentinel, a creation of the Jailer. The Ruin Sentinel has no corporeal form. It is only an empty soul that haunts the armor. So despite the Ruin Sentinels having names in this boss fight, there is no human being within the armor. Interestingly enough, this isn't the only place we'll fight the Ruin Sentinels, as they do appear in another area, but this is the only place in the game where they count as an actual boss fight. But as I said before, it's still a pretty darn cool one.